If you were to choose between saving the life of one person over another, who would you choose? Your childhood best friend with a compassionate heart? Or a shady businessman known for exploiting his workers with unreasonable hours and shoddy living accommodations? The choice seems obvious, right? At least, I hope it is. Naturally, you'd pick the person who presumably has better moral qualities. In this case, your best friend. But what if we make things a little bit more complicated? What if I told you that the businessman is the only person in town who can provide work for the majority of the town's citizens, even if the working conditions are unfair? Maybe this fact makes your choice a bit harder, but maybe it doesn't. Let's say that it does, and you've changed your mind to now think that the businessman's survival is essential for your townspeople's future. Would you change your mind again if I told you that your best friend runs a charitable shelter that serves all the needy citizens in your town? How about if we add another person into the mix? How much harder does your choice get if you also had to consider the life of the town's last remaining physician? And what happens if we add another person to the equation? And another? Your decision on who to save only gets harder and harder, and the weight of your ultimate choice transforms from what is originally just a tough compromise into a now overwhelming and brutal burden. That's the Pathologic 2 experience. It's a game about making hard choices at every turn. If this initial premise interests you, I'm going to warn you that this is going to be a pretty spoiler-heavy review of the game. So if you don't want to get spoiled at all, this is the point where you turn back. So for those of you who are still here, I need to give you guys some very short context about the game before I talk a little bit more about it. In Pathologic 2, you play the role of a surgeon named Artemy Burach, also known as the Haruspeks. You've spent the last few years of your life in the capital city receiving a medical education before you are called back to your hometown by your father, who mysteriously warns you that a great difficulty lies ahead and that he needs your help.
My dear son, Artemy, I write to you after so many years apart in the hopes that you may find a way to return to us. Something worries me. I fear a difficult trial approaches.
By the time you get back to your hometown, however, your father has apparently been murdered by someone, but no one knows who did it. First, you are the one who is blamed for his death. And later, the townsfolk begin to accuse a mythical shape-shifting creature for the act, which starts a lynching party aimed at random citizens. Beyond what has happened to your father, however, is something far more sinister. He was right about something terrible coming to town, and it has been here before. Only this time, your father isn't around to stop it. 5 years ago, a deadly sickness known as the Sand Plague broke out in one district of the town. Your father was able to contain it by boarding up the district and quarantining all of the individuals inside, resulting in the deaths of many infected citizens. And though many thought the Sand Plague was gone forever, you know better because you've just seen it in what initially seemed like a bad dream. But now you know that it's coming, and that it's real. And there doesn't seem to be anything you can do to stop it and its destruction. But maybe there is, and you've got to try. With each passing day, the plague spreads and grows stronger. Your resources are thin, your time is limited, and there are forces beyond your comprehension that try to stop you in your mission to save this town. Will you be able to save everyone, or will the plague overcome your efforts? You've got 12 days to do it. Let's take a look at the unforgiving world of Pathologic 2 and examine exactly how it feels to grow hopeless in an already hopeless world. I've titled this section of the video Hope because I truly do think you feel a sense of it when you first begin the game on day 1. Before I say anything more, however, I first have to mention that the game's lore is quite extensive. So much so to the point that I can't talk about all of its intricacies without meandering away from the core topic of this video. The game's plot is brilliantly complex, and there are a lot of elements to the story that are cryptic, strange, and difficult to decipher. I can't do the whole story any justice unless I break out a whole encyclopedia of the game's many characters and events. Having said that, I'm going to emphasize that this video isn't meant to cover those deeper, more enigmatic aspects in the overall narrative. Instead, I'm going to focus more on how the game makes you feel, more specifically on the hopelessness and misery of it all. Of course, this isn't a universal experience for everyone, especially considering the fact that if you fully understand the game's mechanics ahead of time, you really can save everyone if you try hard enough. Plus, people dying or getting infected doesn't necessarily mean that you care enough about any of them to feel awful over it. Regardless, that doesn't take away from the oppressive atmosphere of the game, and if you were to experience this game for yourself, I think that you're more likely to feel the sheer desperation in its gameplay than not. I find games to be at their strongest when they can evoke very specific emotions out of you, and like I said, I feel like the game starts out with a little bit of hope. Though, it's a very uncomfortable and weak kind of hope, considering the fact that you know what's coming. The reason that I say that it's hopeful is because the plague simply isn't here in the town yet in the first 2 days of the game. At the beginning of Pathologic 2, you actually get to see what happens to the town if the plague takes over and kills everyone by the end of day 12. You get to have a redo of sorts, and since you know that the plague is coming, it's something you immediately want to desperately prevent. As dreadful and intense as it is knowing that all of the people in your town are at risk of dying in a few days, there is hope in knowing that you have the power to do something about it, even if you're not sure what to do yet. There is power in knowledge, even if you don't have much of it, and I think that your mere awareness of the plague's imminent arrival can provoke you into thinking that you've really got a shot at stopping it, at least to an extent. After all, if you know something is coming, can't you prepare for it? That's how I felt when I first started the game. In Pathologic 2, there are several things you need to keep track of. Your hunger meter, your thirst meter, and your exhaustion meter must be managed first and foremost, because if you don't take care of these things, you'll die and you can't save anyone. Luckily, since you know that the plague is coming, you can spend the first 2 days gathering some supplies that you need. Food, money, trading goods, water, medicine, herbs, weapons, etc. Okay, you have supplies now. That's good enough to save the town, right? Well, it isn't quite that simple or easy. There's a lot more you have to do than just gather things. Preparation isn't enough. Not in this game. When the plague comes, entire districts and the people in them will be at risk of getting infected. In order to protect them, you need to make and give them immunity boosters to keep them from getting infected. Though, this doesn't mean that they won't get infected. Everyone has a chance of getting infected at the end of the day, though it's more likely that they'll get sick if they didn't get an immunity booster from you. If they manage to get infected, you then need to provide them with antibiotics every day to keep them alive. And again, this doesn't guarantee their survival. The sand plague is deadly, and the only way to get rid of it is finding a true cure. But remember, if you spend time trying to make a cure, that only takes away from the time you need to use on keeping people alive. It's a delicate balance you need to consider, and sacrifices will be made. You don't have unlimited time to walk around town giving people immunity boosters and antibiotics. There's a clock, and it's ticking fast. The town is huge and maze-like, and if people are getting infected in multiple districts, you need to manage your time wisely in order to get to them all. And if you don't have any resources stockpiled up, and trust me, you'll run out of them very quickly, you're going to need to take precious time out of your day to get more. And if you do this, you won't have enough time to save everyone. You just won't. Whether you like it or not, people will get sick and people will die. There's not enough time in the day to look for a cure, to gather food, to gather water, to make medicine, to administer that medicine, and to get enough sleep. There just isn't. And that's where things start to fall apart. That's when you start to feel hopeless. You might have gotten by on the first few days without any of the town's most important people getting sick or dying. But your luck doesn't last forever. Thousands of citizens are getting infected, and with that comes more problems. Food is becoming scarce, water is starting to get rationed out, and people are starting to get more violent. With how dangerous the town is becoming, you're no longer limited to your fear of just the plague. You start fearing the violence that comes with disorder. People are counting on you to be at your best, so you cannot afford to die even if the game does technically bring you back, although with lower health. Each night, the game gives you a death count, and although the majority of the people dying are unnamed NPCs that you don't really care for, it puts into perspective just how much violence is happening, and just how many people are getting infected beyond just the people you truly honestly care to save. The idea of all these citizens dying serves to take its toll on your outlook of the outbreak and your inability to stop it. Your responsibilities continue to grow, too. It's your job to take care of the citizens being treated in the town's makeshift hospital. But how can you save them all when you're on the verge of running out of food, money, water, and medicine? Payment isn't enough because time is your most valuable resource, and money is becoming less and less valuable by the day. So what should you do? You've got no choice but to gather the resources you need to survive and save others, no matter what you have to do to get them. Thugs are everywhere, districts are being burned down for housing the plague, and the sick are being mercilessly murdered. But all of this gives you the opportunity to scrounge for resources from the dead. However it is that you get your resources, whether you buy them, whether you trade for them, whether you loot them, whether you steal them, or whether you kill for them, there is always a cost. And again, your greatest cost is time. Wherever you go and whatever you do, the weight of time weighs on your shoulders. This means that every single one of your choices has gravity to them. And when I say every single one of your choices, I mean it. You cannot waste even a single second. Lives are on the line. Time is ticking. Your decision to look through a garbage can in search of a single morsel of food can be the difference between survival and death. And it could also mean that you've just let somebody you care about die. Should you go to the market? Should you check out the pharmacy to see if they have what you need? What if they don't, and you just wasted an hour going there for no reason? Even if they do have what you need, should you spend what little money you have on antibiotics to save people? Or should you save your money for food to keep yourself alive? Or maybe, should you save all your money for weapons and clothes to protect yourself? Is it worth going to an infected part of town and risk getting sick yourself? Should you help people in a burned down district filled with violent looters? What happens if you follow a lead that doesn't end up panning out to anything? Or what happens if you make a single misstep that gets you lost? Every single second that you waste only makes things feel more hopeless. Because if you're sacrificing time for resources that you don't even get, that only means you're sacrificing lives for no reason. You can't help but feel frantic when you move around town. There's this intense dread that follows you wherever you go. And you just can't get rid of it because it only gets stronger and stronger as more people start to get sick. There's something to be said about the crushing feeling you get when you first have optimism and then you lose it. It's a much worse experience than starting out with the assumption that everyone is screwed. Because if you initially think that most people are going to die anyway, you're much more willing to make sacrifices. But when you have optimism and lose it, every death and every infection feels like a crushing blow. If you've come to accept the fact that you cannot save everyone, who then do you choose to save? There are a lot of people in town that you need to protect and save, though I will admit that your emotional connection to a lot of them isn't necessarily a strong one. Aside from a select few individuals, your most powerful connections to these characters are your shared histories with the town. And that, I think, is enough of a connection to me. Everyone has their own importance to this town and this town's community, and their lives mean something. You have an inherent responsibility as a medical practitioner to save lives. So even if you don't like a specific character, it feels wrong to sacrifice their life for the life of another. But if you're running out of time, you have no choice but to do so. And when that happens, you need to start thinking about these people and who they are. What value do they have to this community? What kind of person are they? Who does this town need? You get to decide this. You might even choose to save one person over another just because they're closer to you on the town map. I'll admit that throughout the game, I continued to try my hardest to save everyone even when things looked bleak. But unfortunately for me, I got the sand plague and wasn't able to cure it for a very long time. Meaning that I got so desperate every day that I had to use resources I could have used to save other people just to keep myself alive. And because of that, I had to forego protecting the town's road architect and scholar, because if I went out of my way to help her, I simply would have died. I just didn't have the time to get to her. But I did make a different choice. Since she hadn't yet caught the sand plague, I was okay with running the risk of letting her get it just so I could save someone else. The thing is, the person I decided to help instead was an infected dance performer who allegedly trafficked children for a circus troupe. You might think that this was an awful moral choice, but I think otherwise. It's unclear whether or not she's lying about her past, and regardless of that, she seemed like someone who wanted to atone for her actions, and I didn't feel like it was my prerogative to punish her. Again, I wanted to save everyone, no matter who they were. But despite my efforts, she still died. Ultimately, I was still able to save the town's road architect, but not without her suffering from the effects of the sand plague. And that's what makes your choices even harder. Despite all your hard work, you can't guarantee that someone will live. You have to make sacrifices with each and every one of your choices, and they won't always work out. And because of this, you will lose people, even people you like. There were a couple of instances where I prioritized the life of certain individuals over others, like my good friend Laura Ravel. I gave her the first cure that I ever got, and this choice undoubtedly led to the suffering of many others. Because of this choice, 2 other infected individuals I could have saved died instead. One of them was a legendary architect who built incredible structures for the town. And not only that, he was the owner of the town's only pub. And since I gave that cure to Laura, I couldn't use it on myself either. Maybe if I did, I would have had more time and resources to protect the other people in my town. But I made a choice that had rippling effects throughout the rest of the game, and I had to live with that choice, even if it cost lives. At the end of the game, you do end up finding a way to cure everyone, but you can make the choice not to if you think that the sand plague is the Earth's way of protecting itself and its life. I personally chose to eradicate the plague and accept the repercussions of doing so, and though I was quite relieved that I finally saved the town, it felt like an empty kind of relief, There were a lot of sacrifices that were made to get to this point, and you can't just forget about them because the game even makes you confront your losses. You must revisit all those who died when you explore the town at the epilogue, and it's something that evokes a very strong sense of melancholy. I wouldn't say that you feel guilty over these deaths, because I don't think it's about feeling guilty, and I don't even think it's about feeling like you failed. The game even tells you once you've treated someone that you've done all that you can, meaning that it isn't really your fault if someone dies because you tried your absolute best. The real villain at fault here is the Sand Plague. What you ultimately end up feeling more at the end is a distinct sense of loss and mourning, not success and happiness. I'm not saying that you don't feel accomplished at the end, but rather, it's a sense of accomplishment where loss and mourning is at the forefront of your feelings. In my playthrough, I started thinking about all the people who died and what could have gone differently. What if the young boy Notkin had lived? What if my old friend Ruben had lived? Doesn't the community need them? How will the town be without their presence? How will we rebuild? Can we rebuild with the people who remain? Are the people I saved the people who should remain? Regardless of how I looked at things in hindsight, it didn't matter. Thoughts cannot change your permanent choices. At the end of the game, it's about acceptance for those choices and those losses. And once you do that, it's time to look forward, even after tragedy. The unforgiving nature of Pathologic 2 is what makes the story so powerful, because at the end of it all, despite how unforgiving the entire journey was, there's something compelling about fighting against an almost unstoppable force and winning. And although the point of this video was to highlight how hopeless the game makes you feel, I also have to point out that this doesn't necessarily mean that the game ends on a hopeless note. Just like how the game breaks down your optimism into a pit of hopelessness, it can also build it right back up into hopefulness. Remember, you are Artemi Burak, and you're a surgeon. The town is your patient, and the idea of being a surgeon who fixes a town and its people is a powerful idea. What was once a broken, destroyed, and unraveled town can become fixed under your hands, and there's hope in the idea of rebuilding it with the people you saved. And that's why I think that Pathologic 2 is an incredible game. I know I've spoiled most of the game throughout this video, but I still think it's worth a play if you haven't tried it. Your experience will be different from mine. Maybe you'll save everyone unlike me. And though the game has a multitude of issues mostly stemming around its poor combat system, I believe that the narrative experience overcomes its mechanical flaws. It's challenging, yes, but it's manageable. And most importantly, it's worth it. Even when you fail, even when things seem hopeless, there's a beauty to trying. There's a beauty to persevering. And if Pathologic 2 has taught me anything, it's that there's a light at the end of the tunnel. You just have to reach it. Thank you guys for watching, and I hope you enjoyed the video. By the way, I just made a Patreon, so if you want to support me so I can make more of these videos, I hope you check out the link in the description. You'll get access to voting on future content, cut analysis from future videos, and other things like being credited at the end of my videos. Again, thank you for watching, and have a great rest of your day.